Before we get into the story, a quick warning. This is a true case, and some parts may be difficult to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. For 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan, Monday, September 14, 2015, felt like the best day of his life. The day before, he'd spent Sunday with his girlfriend, morning mass with her family, then time with friends, and a quiet, romantic evening together. Waking up next to her that Monday morning, he felt on top of the world. In his mind, he was already stepping into adulthood as someone important, confident, and in control. After all, he believed he was about to take over the family business, Buchanan Construction. He imagined inheriting the cars, the house, the land, the money, and he was sure he'd run the company better than his father, who he felt had driven it into the ground. From his point of view, nothing could stand in his way. But on October 1, 2015, everything collapsed. That day, Nolan was arrested at Benicia High School by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. He was held at the Juvenile Treatment Center in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when a jury of 7 men and 5 women found him guilty on 3 counts. Their deliberation took just 2 hours. Nolan was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. That was the end of his plan to take over the family business. Neighbors and classmates described Nolan as a model student, responsible, polite, and focused. "As far as I know, he was a good kid," said fellow student Campbell Roxton. "He cared about school, he was always kind. I'm honestly surprised he was arrested." So what happened inside the Buchanan family? Let's walk through the events step by step. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to interview for an office manager position at his construction firm. Adam was divorced at the time and raising his son Nolan on his own. Molly was outgoing, warm, and immediately caught Adam's attention, and the feeling was mutual. They started dating, the relationship became serious, and Molly eventually moved in. She wanted a close, loving family, and made an effort to build a good relationship with Nolan. Not long after, she became pregnant. Their son, Gavin, was born. People who knew the Buchanans said the 4 of them seemed like a solid, comfortable family. Adam's construction business provided a steady income, and they even bought a small vacation cabin in El Dorado County. It sat on 19 acres in Greenwood, rustic, with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas, but Adam was handy and spent time fixing it up. The family visited the place often. On September 13, 2015, at around 10 a.m., the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township along Highway 193. By the time they arrived, about 10 acres had burned. The cabin on the property was mostly gone, still smoldering. Firefighters spotted charred remains in the ashes, but assumed they belonged to a pet trapped inside. They kept the scene intact and called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office at 11 a.m. When the coroner arrived, the cabin was still too hot to enter. They had to wait for the heat to drop before beginning their examination. Once inside, the coroner noticed the smell of burned flesh. A human skull and part of a chest were eventually identified. Someone had died in the fire. Backup was called, and deputies arrived to examine the site. Their first impression was that this wasn't a primary home, more likely a getaway cabin. A Dodge truck and trailer were found near the cabin. Running the plates led investigators to Buchanan Construction, owned by Adam Buchanan. The business address was about 160 miles away in Benicia, California. This fit the idea that the cabin was a vacation property. The next step was simple: figure out who had been inside the cabin when it burned. Was it Adam or someone else? Detectives reached out to Benicia police to perform a welfare check on the family. Officers drove to the Buchanan home and saw a white Ford pickup in the driveway. When they knocked, Adam's 16-year-old son answered the door. He looked surprised to see officers standing there and asked why they were visiting. The officers decided to start by figuring out who was supposed to be at the cabin, without alarming anyone at the house. It was entirely possible that someone from the construction company had borrowed the work truck, not Adam himself. When they spoke with Nolan, he told them his father, Adam, had gone to the family's cabin for the weekend with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Gavin. They were expected back later that evening. Nolan said he'd stayed home to look after the house and the yard while they were gone. At this point, investigators didn't have enough evidence to say with certainty that the remains found in the cabin belonged to the Buchanan family. But the combination of Nolan's information and the discovery of what looked like two sets of remains was enough for authorities to list the family as missing in connection with the wildfire. On September 14th, detectives returned to the Buchanan home to speak with Nolan again and try to narrow down who might have been inside the cabin. This time, they were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They told officers that Adam often drove up to the cabin to work on repairs, and they were extremely worried because they hadn't been able to reach him or Molly. From their conversation, officers learned that the cabin usually ran on generators, but at the time of the fire, it hadn't had electricity. There were propane tanks inside, though, which meant the fire could have started accidentally or not. By September 15th, the site had finally cooled enough for investigators to begin a detailed search. They collected debris, including material from a fire pit near the cabin. According to Detective James Peterson, that's when they found something that shifted the entire case: a fragment of skull with a bullet hole. At that moment, he said, we realized this wasn't an accident. We were looking at a homicide. Forensics later found that another bullet had lodged in the thigh of one of the victims. The smaller skull, the one with the bullet hole, appeared to belong to a child. The theory of an accidental fire was no longer plausible. Someone had intentionally tried to burn the bodies. The next question was how the murders happened. Was it a robbery gone wrong? A double murder, suicide? Or something connected to Buchanan Construction? Maybe a disgruntled employee or a business dispute. Investigators started with the business angle, looking into anyone who might have held a grudge against Adam. They also examined Molly's life, trying to determine whether she had enemies or anyone who might want to hurt her. When those leads went nowhere, detectives shifted their attention to problems inside the marriage, and there were many. They learned that Adam and Molly's relationship had been deteriorating for a long time. At the time of the fire, they hadn't shared a bedroom in months. Investigators found a diary where Molly described mistreatment from Adam. Witnesses told police they had seen Adam behave harshly toward Molly and the kids. Molly's mother, Susie Slanker, told detectives, "There were times I was afraid they'd kill each other," during one of their arguments. Although Molly didn't end the relationship, she frequently took Gavin and stayed with her parents for a few days before returning home, only for the cycle to repeat. Investigators also discovered that the couple liked to hunt near the cabin, and both were familiar with guns. With that in mind, detectives considered the possibility that a fight between the couple escalated. Someone fired a shot, and then the shooter took their own life. But something didn't fit. In a murder-suicide, a gun should have been found near the remains, and it wasn't. Investigators wondered if the weapon had been damaged beyond recognition in the fire. For 5 days, forensic teams sifted through the ashes by hand. The search was extremely detailed, but no firearm was recovered. Around the same time, DNA results came back. The remains were confirmed to be those of Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son, Gavin. All three had been shot before the fire started, and the angles of the wounds ruled out suicide. Without a weapon present, investigators knew someone else had been there, a fourth person, and that person had shot the Buchanans. The investigation had to reset from the beginning. With no other leads, police turned back to the only surviving member of the immediate family, 16-year-old Nolan. He told officers that his family left in an old Dodge truck. He said Adam chose the work vehicle instead of his personal Ford, which was still parked in the driveway, because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks for landscaping around the cabin. That same truck was the one investigators found near the burned remains. When asked again why he stayed behind, Nolan repeated what he'd said earlier, that he was responsible for watching the house and garden while his father and stepmother were gone. Nolan also mentioned a neighbor who had been growing illegal plants along the edge of the Buchanan property. His father had argued with the neighbor several times, demanding he stop and even threatening to involve the police. Nolan also shared details about the family business. It was struggling financially, The company had been downsizing, and the number of employees had dropped to just 5. Adam had mentioned mounting debts, and it was clear the business was under serious strain. With this information, detectives had a lead: the neighbor. In that area, violent incidents were sometimes connected to disputes over illegal crops. It was possible that a threat to go to the police could have triggered the murders. The problem was, no one knew exactly which neighbor was involved. Investigators went door to door, talking to every homeowner along the street. They found a man who confirmed a disagreement with Adam over the crops. But according to him, the issue had been settled after a single heated discussion. He had an alibi, and the theory quickly fell apart. The focus then shifted back to the business. On September 18th, police visited Adam's construction company to interview employees. Nolan had been truthful. The company was in rough shape. Debts had climbed past $30,000. Layoffs had been necessary, and some former employees were bitter. Investigators considered that someone who had been let go might have had a motive. Then, luck intervened. Over the weekend, the local high school had organized a community cleanup near a business park about a mile from Buchanan Construction. On September 19th, students found a small purse under a bush. Inside were identification cards and documents belonging to Molly and Adam. Nearby lay a .22 caliber rifle. Detectives rushed to the scene. The discovery led to a new theory. The killer had used the rifle to shoot the Buchanan family and then tried to cover up the crime. They likely carried the documents and weapon back to Benicia after the murders. The location of the evidence suggested the perpetrator lived locally, strengthening the idea that the crime might have involved a disgruntled employee. Police sent the rifle and purse for examination and obtained a warrant to inspect the company's records and property. During the search, they found a surveillance camera. By chance, it wasn't aimed at company equipment or the building. It pointed toward the center of the parking lot. The footage provided a breakthrough. Since it was known the family left for Greenwood on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's tape. They were surprised. Adam had attached the trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not the Dodge truck Nolan had claimed. It became clear Nolan had deliberately misled investigators. If the Ford had towed the trailer, someone else must have driven it back and parked it at the Buchanan home. Detectives re-interviewed Nolan carefully, asking seemingly casual questions to avoid alerting him. He described his weekend and who he had seen. They asked about trivial details. The movie they saw, how he paid for shopping at the mall, even how he bought dessert. Nolan answered casually he had used his father's credit card. Officers then got a warrant to search the Buchanan home, the vehicles, and the company's financial records. The white Ford was still in the driveway. On inspection, the wheels had reddish soil clinging to them, similar to the dirt at Greenwood. While the fire had destroyed tire tracks near the cabin, this dirt suggested the car had been there recently. Investigators also tracked credit card activity. Adam had used his card on Friday, September 11th, at a Taco Bell on the way to Greenwood. Nolan, who claimed he had stayed home all day, supposedly had the card. Checking the diner's security cameras, detectives saw the white Ford, not a truck, at the location. Inside the car, they found a receipt for 4 drinks, not 3. At the fire scene, investigators had noted 4 cups among the remains. It was now clear Nolan had been in the car that day. The next credit card activity happened on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes from the cabin. Adam's parents had told investigators that their son and daughter-in-law often stopped there after working on the cabin. Security footage showed the couple leaving the bar, and highway cameras tracked their route. Around 2:30 a.m., a Ford F-150 headed toward the cabin, and about an hour later, it was captured going in the opposite direction. The first trip had Adam and Molly in the car, the second, only Nolan. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used at 3 places in Benicia: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. Since Adam only had one card, these transactions directly contradicted Nolan's story. By this point, forensic results confirmed what detectives had suspected. Nolan's fingerprints were on the rifle. He was arrested in the middle of a high school class. Nolan pleaded not guilty. He told a story that tried to shift blame onto his father, claiming Adam shot the family first. According to Nolan, in the chaos, he wrestled the rifle away and accidentally shot Adam while defending himself. He said he panicked, poured gasoline on the house, and set it on fire to cover up the incident. His defense focused on Adam's abuse of Nolan and other family members. But the medical examiner pointed out a problem. The bullet that struck Gavin's skull had been fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan claimed he and his brother had been woken up together by the noise and saw the shooter enter the room. In his version, he pushed the rifle away, and the shot would have been fired at a roughly 45-degree angle, inconsistent with the evidence. The prosecution argued that Nolan killed his brother while the parents were away at the bar. Then, when Adam and Molly returned, he shot them as well. Based on the position of the bodies, Adam was killed first, then Molly. Afterward, Nolan took the rifle and his parents' documents, poured gasoline over the bodies, and set the house on fire. He then returned home, spent the day with his girlfriend, and built an alibi. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In delivering the sentence, Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the abuse Nolan had suffered and the testimony suggesting he killed his brother to spare him from the same fate. But she also cited the premeditation, the alibis, the planning for the family business, and behavior observed at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center after his arrest. "Everyone has the opportunity to change," Judge Kingsbury told Nolan. "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you may have a chance at parole in 25 years. It's up to you whether you take that chance." Nolan continues to maintain his innocence. If he is ever released on parole, he will be required to pay significant compensation to the victims, though the amount is currently unknown. If you found this story compelling, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber helps us continue sharing stories we care about.